here tonight. This is the October Center meeting of the Ottawa Center of the RASC. We have meetings every 2 weeks. The next meeting will be on the first Friday of November. Hopefully that will be in our next meeting will be in our usual room downstairs. Well, tonight we have one main lecturer, Mr. Steve Dodson, and I have to be very careful how I say that name because there's a great deal of confusion with Steve Dodson and John Dobson, the inventor of the Dodsonian telescope. And Steve Dodson has built many Dobsonian, well, I guess one major Dobsonian instrument, and the confusion doesn't end there. They both have a connection to San Francisco. John Dobson practiced his sidewalk astronomy in the San Francisco area. Steve is originally from San Francisco. But many years ago, Steve came to Canada and he moved with his family to Ottawa and studied at the University of Ottawa and graduated with a master's degree in physics. And subsequent to that, he moved to Northern Ontario, Timmins, and he taught physics in high school physics for many years. And in fact, he taught himself French because he happened to teach in a French high school. But most recently, Steve has been working for Science North, which is in Sudbury. And he is working there as an astronomer. It's the kind of job that many of us would just love to have because it's practicing our hobby in the daytime as well. And so Steve is going to be talking about his many adventures tonight as an amateur astronomer, and he is a member of the Ottawa Center even though he lives in Sudbury. So Steve, please come forward and give us your talk.
Well, it's really great to be here. I love coming to Ottawa, and I don't get here often enough. The last time I gave a talk in the Ottawa Center was 10 years ago. So I'm going to sort of pick up where I left off. And I'm really inspired, and I'm a bit in awe also, because when I look at the speakers that you have at the Ottawa Center, see the shoes that I have to fill. I mean, people like David Levy, who discovered so many comets and such an incredible observer, but more than anything, a real heart and soul of the amateur astronomer expressed and personified. And Stephen O'Mara, who sees fantastic things because he's unleashed his eyes and pried into corners of the visual universe that people thought you just couldn't see, and seen incredible things. Well, those are the kind of shoes that I have to follow. And this is such an incredible powerhouse of a center, the Ottawa Center. You have people like Paul Boltwood, who isn't satisfied with commercial CCD cameras, which he used and got great experience with, so he made his own. And I just learned from Doug tonight that Doug and Paul have already been out testing this camera, and gathered the first night they tested it with light pollution and all kinds of problems, they just found Stephan's quintet, just like that, of these 15th and 16th magnitude galaxies. And you have Doug himself, who has got incredible expertise of astronomical programming and imaging and image processing. And Doug has recently provided amateur astronomers with a great computer program to be able to implement the ingenious null test that Peter Saravollo, one of your other STAR members, has resurrected and polished up and made available to amateur astronomers for testing telescope optics. And Peter, I think we should all be very, very thankful to for the leadership role that he's taken in the world of optics and providing ways for us to get a handle on optical quality. And of course, Peter is the editor of Telescope Making magazine, and I really believe that magazine has improved vastly And well, the list goes on, and I could probably rave about just about everybody in this room, but I won't because I have things to get onto in the talk. And there are other people I want to mention, and I think we'll go to a slide now. And one person I want to mention that has really made the Ottawa Centre what it is, in my mind, Ken Tapping, who's no longer in Ottawa because of shuffles in National Research Council, and I feel it's a great loss for us and a great boost for British Columbia that he's now out at Penticton. Well, Ken, it was the person who personified to me the joy and challenge of doing science everywhere, all the time, with any equipment that's available. And if Ken didn't have a nice radio telescope or radiometer like this, he'd do radio observations with a transistor radio set, handheld. Or he'd pick up something from his basement or something from his backyard or the kitchen and do science just for the joy of it. And you just to see him experimenting and trying things for the play of science. Very, very inspiring. And this, I love this, a scientist who has a lab in a major research institution, traditional architecture and traditional modes of thought and so on ought to have very staid premises. Well, this is Ken's door, and I spent an all-night vigil, or rather a 36-hour vigil with the grinding machine that was then in the basement of the National Research Council. Took this picture during the night sometime. It really told me a lot about the person who does science because there's a lot of joy and excitement and fun in it. An overly traditional person wouldn't have a door like that. And you have Fred Lossing, who couldn't be here tonight, who's got a basement full of science gear, experiments that he's perpetually getting off into new things with, a garage full of backyard telescopes, and he's been down to Stellafane so many times, winning so many prizes, and sort of cultivating the other talented telescope makers right here in the Ottawa Centre. That Scotty Houston, who is the grand old man of Stellafane for the last decade or more, writes the Deep Sky Wonders and Sky and Telescope. He could be heard to be muttering under his breath many occasions when Fred and the Ottawa telescope makers would cart off these prizes after the judging Saturday night presentations at Stellafane. He heard to be muttering, "Damn Canadians, come down here, take all our prizes." Well, it was all very good-natured fun. But that's Fred Lossing, and this could be one of his scopes, but it isn't. It happens to be, I've got this in here for another reason. And this takes me back to the last time I gave a talk at the Ottawa Centre, which was in 1981. And that summer I was here with my 22-inch mobile reflecting telescope that I had just finished on a concept platform. And the reason why I decided to make a huge telescope like that, not everybody had 25-inch telescopes in 1980 when I decided to do this. In fact, what got me started was sort of a puzzle. You see, this part is a Poinsett tracking platform, Poinsett equatorial table, and it seemed to be a wonderful thing to put a Dobsonian telescope on. But in 1980, nobody had done it, and the biggest telescope that had ever been photographed and published in Sky and Telescope on a Poinsett platform was this 10-inch f6 by Mr. Irvin Ulbert of Washington State, USA. That was the biggest. There were no Coulter Odyssey 17.5 inchers on Galaxy, on Jupiter equatorial platforms. Not available. So I thought, why hasn't anybody done this? And I puzzled over that for a while, and then I said, who cares why nobody did it? I'm going to do it. And that launched me on uniting the Poinsett equatorial platform with the Dobsonian telescopes. So I advertised in Sky Gazers Exchange, Sky Telescope, for a mirror 16 to 20 inches. And I got a phone call from this person, who is Gerard Pardillon, the Vice President of the San Francisco Sidewalk Astronomers. And here he is with John Dodson. This is a photo from Sky and Telescope, and they are measuring the center spot on the 22-inch mirror, and Gerard was phoning to offer to sell me that same mirror because he and John had gone on to other things. And I was flabbergasted. It was wonderful to have this call from my hometown, as was pointed out, and I was really glad to be in touch with the San Francisco Sidewalk Astronomers. And we eventually made a deal, and I got the mirror. Now, one of the advantages of making a telescope in that size range, as Rob Dick will know, because he's built a beautiful observatory with 25-inch telescope, well, you get to spend some of your time working inside the telescope, like this man here, who happens to be Edwin Hubble, and that happens to be the 200-inch telescope. But even in a 22-inch, you can spend some of your time. It was even funnier how I took this picture. I had no assistants. There was nobody available. I was building this tube assembly in a spare classroom in the school where I was teaching in North Bay at that time. And I put my camera on a tripod, set the timer release, ran and jumped, and twisted myself around, and got the picture. And sometimes I was actually working inside of it, as I am here, because I had to extend the 12-foot sonotube into a 14-foot long tube for that mirror. Well, then it got too heavy and too big to go out through the staircase that it came in on, so we took it out to the roof. And this man is Jean-Marc Filion, was the president of the Ontario Rock Climbers Association. And he said, no sweat, we can lower people down mountains when they're injured, and our equipment has such an over-rating on it, we can easily lower your 400-pound telescope tube. Well, this is where I was sort of getting a heart attack. I rarely believe this guy. But we got it down onto a trailer and into my backyard, where I installed the mirror cell. Well, Gerard's telescope was called Long Eye, and here's what it looked like when he set it up at Yosemite Park. And if I took that telescope, which is obviously a pretty tall thing, about 4 feet high in the box here, and if I scaled that up, rather if I took Irvin Olver's 10-inch telescope, which I reproduced here, and scaled up the concept platform and put it on a trailer, and then put Gerard's telescope on here, it would have ended up being monstrously tall. This is a 10-foot pole that you probably wouldn't touch that with. But this is the polar axis, because concept platforms have a pivot at one end. And the polar axis goes through that, and the telescope mass is way up above the polar axis. It's unstable. So, to make a long story short, I modified the platform and made it into a ring, and let the telescope swing down through the ring, and build a massive broad fork so everything is very stable, and we're hoisting the tube into position. There's what it looked like, and everything comes down in broad triangles, so it's very stable and rides very well on the road, and all of that as well. And this is what it looked like later in the summer when I got to the Indian River Observatory. Recognize those trees? That's here in Ottawa, at the Ottawa Centre Observatory. But the real thrill was getting to Stellafane. Not that I wasn't thrilled to be here, but that was on the way back from Stellafane, and this was the first time I was at Stellafane, and to be there with the Porter Turret telescope reflected in the backside of my mirror, the famous pink clubhouse, and to be part of that with my own telescope, it was a great thrill. Oh, that's Rob Dick's telescope, right? The built like her, is that what he said? That's what the magazine caption said. That's Rob's brick scope. And here's how people get up and observe, although that person looks like he's taking a Herschelian pose here, looking in the side of the tube.
Well, this is the payoff of all the work. It's being out under the stars. And I could never be an astronomer at a desk with the console in front of me and the glass between me and the telescope. It's being out under the stars. That's the payoff for me. That's what gives me my energy. And that's what gave me a lot of energy this morning. Peter Sarabola was up at midnight last night and hasn't been to bed since. So he's got a big dose of that starlight last night. Well, I just got up at 5:30 a.m. Saw Leo in the east in a nice dark sky with Venus and Jupiter underneath it. Just gorgeous, and that told me that it was going to be a great day today, and everything was going to work out great, and it wouldn't matter if we changed rooms or anything like that, because we're not supposed to think that the stars have anything to do with how things turn out for us, but it certainly was a good omen for my day. Well, I realized, even as I was building the 22-inch telescope, that the mounting could handle a bigger mirror and a bigger tube assembly. So I got a 29-inch blank. And I didn't bring a 29-inch telescope with me today, not exactly, but we made some interesting progress. And in 1985, I met John Dodson for the first time in Hamilton, actually, not San Francisco, and I drove up with him and the 22-inch telescope in tow from Hamilton to Sudbury, and here he is meeting with Dr. Dave Pearson, who founded Science North. He's the founding director of Science North and is a geologist. And John got a geological tour of the Sudbury Basin, and this is the Onapig Falls area west of Sudbury. Beautiful area, and here they are discussing geology. But as soon as John saw I had a 29-inch blank and that it wasn't ground yet, he said, "What are you waiting for?" I said, "Well, I don't have any grit." They said, "Don't make no never mind. You get on the phone tomorrow morning and you phone around town and you get some grit." So we ended up going to gravestone engravers and picking up grit that they sandblast inscriptions on gravestones with, and we got Inco to make us a steel tool. It turned out to be hard steel, which turned out to make a difference later on. But here we are starting to grind, and believe it or not, actually, this is not the first wet. John did the first wet himself. Can you imagine? 72-year-old man pushing this enormous piece of glass all by himself. And he attracted a great deal of attention, as you can well imagine. And people would flock around to see what was going on. And here he is explaining to somebody what he's doing with the sharpening stone and washing the tool off, spreading abrasive, and what he's doing here is noticing that colder blanks come with built-in ripples. We're not talking about micro ripple. We're talking that you get your eye down lower, look along the glass, and you can hide a nickel in the ripples. So we realized we have a lot of grinding to do on both sides to get a reasonably flat mirror to start with before the curve went in. Well, this is a photo from Sky and Telescope, and this is a 10-inch tool from Sudbury. I brought down a 10-inch mirror and 12-inch mirror and tool from Sudbury, so that I've been talking to John. He was willing to do his famous pitch lap demonstration at Stellafane, and he was there in 1987, I believe. That's right. And I brought down these supplies and organized the logistics at Stellafane, and he demonstrated the making of the pitch lap, and Sky and Telescope published several photos on that. And what I have, with my own camera, I took pictures of Sky and Telescope, taking the pictures that you just saw. There's Dennis the Chico and Roger Sinnott with the camouflage hat. Roger and our own Ontario John Mitten. Many people will know John Mitten with the yellow shirt here. Well, we got back to Sudbury, and John got to work making a pitch lap for the 29-inch mirror. And here he is pouring the pitch. And then at some point you have to flip over this big chocolate tide or whatever it looks like, and flip it over and hope you don't flop pitch all over the floor. And he's mating it to the curve of the glass, but you have to apply some pressure. You have to press. And when John says press, he doesn't mean any half measures. That's what he means. And we got a good pitch lap. I think I'm going to do a few demonstrations of my own. I think some of the Ontario Star parties, including Starfest when I get there, are probably right to have a demonstration of a John Dobson pitch lap. It's really an interesting process. So here we are polishing the 29-inch mirror. Now, to put the 29-inch mirror in the same mounting where the 22-inch was will require a different tube assembly. So I designed a tube that will fit the same mounting and which will hold a 29-inch mirror. This ring will be the base of the mirror cell, and like all the standard serrurier truss designs, you have a square in the middle, and you have truss members coming down from a square. But what I did that was different is I come down to 6 points instead of the usual 4. And at the other end, I come down to 3 points instead of the usual 4. But 3 points is what you want for collimation and so on. So this is what I'm going to build. It isn't built yet. To house the 29-inch mirror on the same mounting that the 22 inches was on. Now, Scotty Houston here, who is regrettably, as you can see, is not as young as he used to be, but still gets to Stella fame almost every year. He wasn't there last year when I really wanted to show him this tube. The reason I wanted to show this to him was because when he came back from Riverside in 1985, he had seen Bob Shipman's 29-inch telescope. It was a classic Coulter design, like a scaled-up Odyssey telescope. And he said he was really impressed with it, and it was great. But what it lacked was, since you have this enormous box on the Coulter design, that it ought to have a door on it so that you could climb in when it starts raining and use this instead of a tent. And I thought that was a neat idea. So when I designed this, I made sure that there was a door. And I call it Scotty's door. And just before we took this picture, I got him to autograph Scotty's door on this model. And I'm hoping to have him do that on the actual telescope as well, when I get that down to Stella fame. And I'm promising that it will be done in this millennium. Which guarantees it will be within my lifetime as well. Well, I left out a step, of course. We went to polishing, from grinding the 29-inch mirror to polishing it pretty fast. And we found that it was easy enough to get the curve in the central part of our mirror, but to get the curve to come out to the edge, you had to remove so much glass as you got near the edge, because we were starting off with a preformed curve on the steel tool that Inco had cut in for us. Well, we needed help, and we knew that some of the work, at least on the 16-inch mirror that Rolf has discovered 4 comets with, was done on this machine that you see here. It was located in the basement of the National Research Council, and I learned was probably built during World War II for wartime optics, but which belonged to you people, belonged to the Ottawa Centre. So we made arrangements through Fred Lossing, who we see here, and Ken Tapping, to get weekend passes to the National Research Council and sort of camp out in Ken's lab and sleep for a couple of hours, then go relieve somebody on this machine and keep the machine going until we had the whole thing curve generated and gone through all the grades of fine abrasive, and then we took it back to Sudbury, ready to polish. The only trouble is, that steel tool was not the cast iron or mild steel that you want. It was regular cold rolled steel plate, or well, I'm not sure of the technical designation. It was too hard anyway. and it was generated to the right curve, and it appeared to have ground away just enough to have good contact with the glass. Of course, we had tiles on the steel, but by the time we had this going, for about 12 hours, the tiles had worn to wafers and were chipping off, so we had to remove them. And we ground with the steel on the glass, and it appeared that we had good contact, as I say, but we found out in retrospect that only the edge of the steel tool was in good contact. The central part of the steel tool was at too long a radius, and there was actually a space in between, the middle. So the center of our glass, the mirror, was not ground as deeply as it should have been. So when we polished, that polished out first, revealing that something was wrong. And we have to go back to midway back in the grinding process to get a good spherical curve on the 29-inch mirror. But anyway, we certainly made a lot of progress that weekend in the basement of the National Research Council. Well, since we had to partially regrind the 29-inch mirror, and since we weren't really sure that we had enough stamina to manage another one of those 36-hour vigils at the National Research Council, we were pretty interested when Ken Tapping phoned and advised me that the machine had to have a new home. So the National Research Council could no longer house it. And I phoned Peter, and I phoned Rolf, and I phoned, there was a lot of consultation that took place, and it developed that the most likely home for that grinding machine, where it could do productive work, was actually in Sudbury. So here we put it in a truck, and we're heading up to Sudbury. And I stopped off to see Rolf and Linda and son, and we had a nice visit there on our way, because that's pretty well up Highway 17. And when we got there, Paul Desjardins, who's a Sudbury area resident, who's built a beautiful new house in the country with a big shop, he's reserved a space in his shop for the grinding machine, even as he was constructing his house, which was a wonderful coincidence. And I don't know how he persuaded his wife that this 1,000-pound piece of machinery should be in their shop, but he did. And we never would have even gotten it off the truck had it not been for Paul and his tractor. So he's a very useful person, and thank goodness he's interested in telescope making. So here we are, delicately moving our wonderful machine into its new home. And there's what it looks like after we fixed a few things and changed the cabinetry, cleaned out the plug drains underneath, sorted out the electronics and all that. This is Alan Ward, who is one of our most active telescope makers, and that's a 10-inch mirror. We got a little bit of smoke off one of the rheostats, and we didn't want to overstress it with something big, so we started with a little 10-inch. And it's a great machine, and it's got a promising new life in Sudbury. And as I reassured all the center people and all of you, if anybody does have a project that requires the machine, you are welcome, and we'll do our best to bill it you and so on. And if you've got enough stamina, you can come up for a weekend and grind a 29-inch mirror. We know it's possible. And this is Mo Chapu, who is making a 10-inch all-spherical Devaney Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope. A mouthful. And that's what he's working on here. Well, when Ken took us down to the machine the first time in the basement of the National Research Council, one of the motors down here was gone. And we scoured the NRC, looking at all the laboratories. Somebody had commandeered the motor to make a glass blowing lathe. So Ken Tapping wrote this inscription on, and it's still there after 3 years. This is not junk. It is used. Do not steal parts. Ken Tapping, room 433. So that's part of the history of the machine. And we like to tell everybody that the way we figure this machine has several comets to its credit since the 16-inch mirror was ground on it. Well, I'd like to tell you a little bit about astronomy in Northern Ontario and what people are doing. And Northern Ontario, some parts of it especially, are really great for astronomy. This is Sunset Point in North Bay. And North Bay is one of the great areas for astronomy in Northern Ontario. This is an old slide, it's a bit dirty, but this was taken in downtown North Bay. And you got a beautiful evening planetscape with the new crescent moon. This was taken from my balcony, half a mile from the downtown core of North Bay, in planetary alignment in the morning sky. And this photograph, I didn't take this from North Bay, but I wanted to point out you have the teapot of Sagittarius here, and you have the Milky Way, and you have the Lagoon Nebula. That photo is just a simple 2-minute exposure taken on a manual tracking platform with a standard 35mm camera. And this nebula, the Lagoon Nebula, is visible to the naked eye from 2 locations I've lived in, looking through the glass of my bedroom window. In both locations within a half a mile of the downtown core. So, North Bay and area is a fabulous place to do astronomy. This is taken at one of my favorite observing sites near North Bay when I lived there. That also, an hour and 10-minute exposure showing the trails, and the sky still isn't too bright. When I arrived in North Bay, I set up an astronomy club in the local high school. This fellow, his name was Guy Larocque. He went, when he left our high school, I believe he went to pre-med and perhaps medical school in Ottawa. And he may have appeared at center meetings. I'm not too sure because I haven't seen him lately. But he instigated me to set up an astronomy club. And I built this mounting and bought this C8 telescope so we could set it up on the roof of the school, again in downtown North Bay, and do some astronomy there. Close up of the telescope, I adapted the Unitron Unihex to it. This is a photo I took at Science North when we built a temporary exhibit for Halley's Comet for $50 using cardboard. This is a 14-foot diameter dome built out of cardboard to make a great exhibit. The reason I could do that is because I'd already worked with the Astronomy Club at North Bay to build a planetarium in the school. We made our own planetarium for, are we at the end or? Oh, no, we aren't. That's fine. This is a photo that Guy Larocque took in 1975. No, 76. Because that's Comet West, eh? Somebody was going to say it, eh? Somebody had already identified the comet. That's Comet West. And he took this picture just a couple of months after the whole idea of a barn door or Hague mount had appeared in Sky and Telescope, where you have 2 pieces of plywood separating as you turn the screw, and you can track the sky and get pictures like this. So I told him about it. He built the mounting, and he got a photo of the comet a couple of months later. Here's a person that some of you will probably know. Sorry, the slide is dark. This is Peter Ryback, who was a longtime Ottawa Centre member and a very active meteor observer down here, among other things. And he went to Temiskaming in Northern Ontario and set up the Temiskaming Astronomical Association, bought this C8, and that was the core of their observing program. But they soon got a cave 10-inch reflector, superb reflector, very, very fine definition. And they built this observatory on rented land on a farm and called it Casey Mountain Observatory. I visited with my telescope, and I noticed a couple of things about that site. First of all, it was the best place I've ever seen to see the zodiacal light. It was just beautiful in the the early spring evening skies. Very, very prominent from that beautiful observatory. Unfortunately, they got evicted from the observatory because the farmer who owned the land one day saw that one of the students who worked at, did some observing at the observatory, had borrowed a computer from a school and brought it to the observatory to do some astronomical computing. And the farmer never stopped to find out that this was borrowed from the school and was going to be returned on Monday morning and so on. He thought, oh, they got a computer, they got money, they can pay a higher rent. So he jacked the rent up and they had to look for another site. Here we are at Casey Mountain Observatory observing. Well, one of the sites that Peter developed was right at the high school where he taught, the Haleberry High School. He got the board to design an observatory in consultation with himself and people at Laurentian University, and they got a grant, and the school built this beautiful observatory, and it's one of the best designed observatories I've ever seen, because you can get into it and out of it erect without bumping your head, without crunching underneath the dome ring. Beautifully human engineered. There's the entrance to it. There's the students using it. But a year after I went to Haleberry to help open the observatory, I gave a talk there, the school board, experiencing financial problems, decided to close the school. And I don't know what they're doing with the observatory. I'm sure the observatory is not closed, but it's not right next to a classroom where kids are studying astronomy either. So that's a great loss. This is I would say, the father of astronomy in Northern Ontario. Father Roger Leclerc. He studied at Harvard with some of the greats, Bart Bach and Harlow Shapley, and he was a living legend in Northern Ontario. Thousands of people that you would just mention something about astronomy, and they'd say, oh, I know something about that. I took a course from Father Leclerc. Well, he got NASA to donate this dome and tracking camera for the investment of a minimal program of photographing satellites, which Father Leclerc did. And that dome is now being used by at least one member of the Sudbury Astronomy Club, Jerry Bourke, who's here with his Meade 8-inch and Meade 622 short focus reflector. He photographs with both of them. He's built his own pier. He has a massive installation there, and he's the only person right now who is making any real use out of this great massive facility. Now, how come that's there? Oh, I see. I know what's happened. I wanted to show a slide of Fred earlier. I think we're probably at the end of this carousel. Fred is here winning a prize for a little solar energy demonstration, which he brought down one year. I don't think it has anything to do with Coke, but good picture. Yeah, that must be time to put the other carousel in. Well, this is Alan Ward, who you saw in other slides, and Fred Boyer, Greg Beach, President and Vice President of the Sudbury Astronomy Club, although Greg has retired from that role, so he can spend more time with his family, I think. They're setting up their 17.5-inch, which they built using Coulter optics, and it's a fairly conventional telescope, and that's part of the story that I want to tell you now. But the other part of that story concerns Father Leclerc again. He obtained a telescope built around the turn of the century, which is supposed to have come from the Vatican Observatory, and it was supposed to have a 22-inch mirror. What we know is that the mirror was very, very thick, probably weighed about 300 pounds, and the tube was a great, enormous rolled paper tube. Must have been about 30 inches in diameter, and it looked so enormous when you saw it on an equatorial mounting. It was just a huge elephant of a telescope. And elephant's probably the right word, as in white elephant, because it never worked properly. And they had it in a dome on top of Laurentian University. This dome, the city lights of Sudbury behind. Sudbury is not like North Bay. Sudbury is a tough place to do astronomy. You have to get those lights out of your view. They've really gone way out on lights. My backyard is ringed with lights. There's 1 square meter of my backyard where you have to stand so that the street lights don't shine in your eyes when you're trying to see the sky. And you can see the Milky Way from my backyard if you do choose your spot. But anyway, this dome was built for that enormous telescope that Father Leclerc brought in. But somehow the university got the wrong set of plans from the architect. And probably were happy when they found out that the set of plans they had called for a 16-foot dome instead of a 20-foot dome. So they went ahead and installed a 16-foot dome. And Father Leclerc came up after the dome was installed and says, "What's going on here? This telescope can't fit in here. This needs a 20-foot dome." Well, the plans call for a 16-foot dome. There's a big confusion, and the university pocketed the extra money, I think. There's not enough money for astronomy at many places, including Laurentian University. So, if the telescope won't fit the dome, what do? Well, you cut a few feet off the top of the tube. Well, then the diagonal doesn't have any place to go. So you move the diagonal down closer to the bottom end of the tube. Well, you need a bigger diagonal, and you also have a bigger side arm. So now the eyepiece comes way out to the side, about 2.5 feet out. Now, wait a minute. Now that mirror at the lower end weighs a ton, or at least 300 pounds. So now the tube is so balanced, so heavy at the lower end, you can't swing it towards the horizon. Well, never mind. We'll get the plate shop to take some 1-inch steel plate and bend it around into an arc that will fit on the top end of the tube. So you weight the top end of the tube. Now, I think you're getting the picture. The telescope was massacred, and it sat up there unused for years and years, and nothing would ever come of it. In fact, the polar axis of the big, spectacularly big mounting up there bent under the weight of the telescope. And at that point, Fred and Greg said, "Look, it's a darn shame that this telescope, this observatory isn't working. It's a beautiful dome, it ought to be used. We'll put our telescope up there. We'll design a new tube for our telescope, for our optics, and put a new telescope, whole new tube assembly with our optics in it, on that mounting, in exchange for the university repairing the polar axis." Well, this picture is published in Sky and Telescope, and Greg did a beautiful job, and I helped lift the tube up when they bolted it on and all that. It was a great project, but the university never got around to assigning any shop time priority to fixing the polar axis, and a whole bunch of other problems came up. All in all, the university was simply not going to support a telescope project, and the telescope that was too big for the dome was first replaced by this one, which was probably the right size for the dome. And the end of the whole story is, right now, you have a telescope up there which is much too small for the dome. They put a 6-inch Maxutov, about 20 inches long, up on that huge mounting there. And that whole big dome is doing nothing but allowing them to use a 2-inch 6-inch Maxutov. So, some pluses and minuses in that story. I'd like to point out that this summer we had 2 brand new summertime weekend star parties in Ontario. One was in Northern Ontario, near North Bay. This is the Gateway to the Universe Star Party, which took place in July, the week after the eclipse, just south of North Bay, at a beautiful campsite. The skies were very, very dark. Unfortunately, they were also very, very cloudy, except for one night when I had the only telescope set up there, I set up my 6-inch refractor. We did some observing. The rest of the time, it clouded over, and Saturday night it poured rain. But you know that can happen to any star party, and I guarantee next summer that many of you, I hope, will come up and enjoy the beautiful dark skies at this site. And it's a very comfortable campground. All the facilities that anybody could want are there. In addition to the dark skies, there's a beautiful river, which amounts to a lake, really, which is great for swimming with a sandy beach. So it's a great place to come with your family and have a wonderful camping weekend. This is Herb McGrath from Temiskaming. He's one of the veteran observers in Peter Ryback's group up there. Peter, now that the school has been closed, is in Bracebridge, and he has started an astronomy club there. So what goes around gets around, and the good stuff is being spread out to other communities, sometimes for reasons which seem unfortunate at first, like the closing of the school. So the Temiskaming Club is still going with people like Herb, supplying a lot of talent and interest up there. He built this beautiful refractor at home. That's very, very fine work, very interesting looking instrument. This is one of our Sudbury astronomers. This fellow is always out at our star parties, helping us show people the moon and planets and clusters and galaxies with this 6-inch reflector that he bought the tube assembly. I helped him to redo the tube assembly, and John Dodson, when he was up in 1987, helped us to redo the mounting. So he's got John Dobson's signature in the mounting. His name is Harold Healy. Well, I want to tell you about a few things we do at Science North. And in 1985, I started a tradition of having monthly star parties for the public at each first quarter moon. And it's been a great success over the years, though I don't always set up such a huge telescope as the 22-inch. And we don't always set up so close to the parking lot where it's so bright either. Star parties of this kind are a great way to reach a large audience and encourage interest and light some sparks of excitement about the sky that sometimes will grow into some more mature interest and feed your clubs and develop interest and support among the public for astronomy, for your club activities, for public interest in astronomy research, and we get a lot of support coming back from having done ventures like these regular star parties. And people that show special interest at these parties, we want to do something special for and allow them to develop their interest. Well, of course, we get them to come to meetings of the Sudbury Astronomy Club, but more than that, I have set up, I've gone from one star party a month at the first quarter moon, which is the best time to meet the public, because everybody wants to see those moon craters on the Terminator at the first quarter moon. They look so deep and the mountains so high. But we now have a second monthly star party at the new moon at a dark site at the local conservation area, so that people who have more interest can come out and have that interest developed and learn how to read star charts and get more into the different kinds of telescopes, develop skills of sky orientation and finding things. And we loan telescopes so they can develop those skills. Notice the Big Dipper over the building here. Well, we sometimes go to great lengths to get to emphasize interest in astronomy. And one thing I do is I have my own one-person tradition. Every year at Science North, the staff is encouraged to adopt a Halloween costume for the day. And each year, I respond to that challenge by trying to create a different planet. Well, you know which planet this is, of course. You know which planet this is. This was hard to do. It was hard to walk around in all day, too. I don't hear anybody saying what planet, so the year was 1989, This was October 1989, and 2 months before we had a very significant planetary event involving this little thing, Voyager spacecraft. So I'm celebrating the Voyager-Neptune encounter here by wearing a Neptune costume. So it's nice to get out of that at the end of the day. You know what planet that is, I hope? The red planet, eh? Well, what's this? This is an astronomical event. Especially when my wife found out. No, actually, it's a Venus-Mars conjunction. One morning, the calendar said it was the first day of spring, March 21st, 1986. Well, I celebrated the first day of spring by putting on my parka and the warmest gear I could find and going out with Greg Beach to the countryside southwest of Sudbury to see if we could find Comet Halley when it was making its fine appearance from Australia. Well, Sudbury is in Australia, and I know that even in Ottawa, it was easier to see the comet that morning than it was from Sudbury. Of course, when it was having its closest approach to Earth, it was invisible from Sudbury. It was just too southerly in the sky. But we went out on that first spring morning, and I had to operate my camera without gloves, and there was a wind, and the chill factor was about minus 35, and every few minutes, constantly taking exposures and reducing the exposure time, because we were already into morning twilight, and Halley's Comet is there, but you see how there's so many stars up here, and of course there are hardly any stars down here, because the atmospheric extinction, the dust along the horizon is too bad. And that's where we find Halley's Comet. There it is, and there is a tail, but it's fighting all that dust to be seen. And it got higher as I continued to take pictures, but of course the sky was getting brighter, so this is the best picture, this is the best we could do. And I think I have an enlargement of that. You can definitely see there is a couple of degrees of tail. Now, I was delighted to find out on the way back from the eclipse on the airplane, Terry Dickinson, who was sitting behind me, told me that he actually used this photo in his new Backyard Astronomer's Guide, which is a fabulously beautiful book. And this picture, or actually he still has my slide, he still has the best slide. The picture I sent him was a little better than this, but basically this picture was in the book. And by the time we took the pictures, and it was starting to get bright so that it was no use trying to take any more pictures, I was so cold that I could hardly get my car key out of my pocket. So I asked Greg if he could serve up some coffee from his thermos to get going. Well, the thermos was frozen shut. And this was the first day of spring. Very interesting memories of Halley's Comet. Well, because we knew ahead of time that when Halley's Comet was closest to Earth, it would be impossible to see from Sudbury, I organized the search for Halley's Comet flight. From Sudbury here, we flew straight south, an hour and 15 minutes, all is necessary, to a point over the Ohio River Valley. You can see here that even from here to here, there's enough curvature of the Earth that you're bringing the comet significantly higher in the sky. And we got clearance to fly straight south, not following any airways, and fly straight south into the U.S. and observe the comet from 35,000 feet altitude. And the pilot flew back and forth so that each side of the airplane could get a view of the comet. Great adventure. Unusual time to board an airplane after midnight. This is John Moon, who is an electronics professor at the local community college. He's also an amateur radio astronomer. And he wanted to photograph Halley's Comet, and he was a marksman. So he thought he'd take a rifle on board. mount a camera on it. And I said, I didn't think you'd get through the security inspection. So in 1 week, he did this hand-carved rifle stock, special purpose. In place of a trigger, you have a cable release. And he got through security, and he got a picture of Halley's Comet from the airplane. Here I am greeting the people and trying to explain to them what's going to happen next. And as we got near cruising and viewing altitude, we got the red lights out. It was a fabulous experience, almost like a space rendezvous, because you had to arrive at the right place at the right time, and not too early and not too late. And Halley's Comet came into view, as I saw from the flight deck of the airplane, just a minute or two before we were scheduled to begin our back and forth to observe it. And we all got a great view. Well, we do a lot of telescope making at Science North too. And here's Paul Desjardins again, building a 6-inch reflector, which I designed to be makeable with hand tools, fold up to fit in a car and be very light and portable and buildable by a beginner. And these are all the parts to make 10 kits to build one of those telescopes. Well, no, I missed some, so I got the other parts in here. And the parts to make one telescope are spread out on here. So there are a lot of parts, but you get very good results with that. Here's what it looks like when it's all together. She didn't build this, but she was available for the picture. In the background is our star wall, which is another project that I did at Science North. It's a computer interface, visitor controlled, fiber optic sky in 3 dimensions. And we get kids to make telescopes where they grind their own lens, then they build their own telescope to put the lens in. It's really neat when you can grind and polish a piece of glass and then put the glass in the tube without sending it away for luminizing, and you get a good close-up of the moon. So Anthony here is pretty happy with his lens, and here's what his finished telescope looks like. This mounting again is designed to let you use telescope has to be very long, and since the tube is inexpensive, it's also a little on the heavy side. Not heavy to lift, it's heavy to aim. So the mounting has to be very rigid and very strong, and yet light, and it folds up, and it's built with hand tools. So this is what I came up with to meet those criteria. And it's even got slow motion controls. And we built 8-inch Dobsonian telescopes with high school students, like these fellows here. And of course that means a lot of illuminizing has to be done. We make frequent trips to the Dave Dunlap Observatory, where we can do mirrors of all sizes up to 29 inches or even 35 inches. And we think we hold the record for the greatest number of mirrors to go in this tank at one time. That's 11 mirrors here, but I think we had 13 mirrors once. And we build our own custom-made rack. We bring it down to the observatory with us, because normally they can only put a few mirrors in at a time. We build little telescopes with younger students, and these telescopes are about 16 power and very, very good telescopes. I told these kids, quite frankly, I felt these telescopes were equivalent to ones that you would have spent at least $100 on to buy on the commercial market. 160 students built these a year ago in the summer. This photograph was published in Sky and Telescope last March. We built telescopes with paper towel tubes. These were designed by Project STAR from Harvard Smithsonian, but we've done some improvements on them that they have turned around and published. So we're quite pleased with that, and we've built over 1,000 of these with the kids that lets them learn how telescopes work and take some of the mystery out of them. Why do you make telescopes with kids? Well, probably the best reason is they will know that a telescope is something that people make, not something that comes out of a big black box high-tech factory, and that it is something of impossible precision that nobody could ever understand. They understand it because they made them. They may actually do as we advise them and take them home and look at the moon and Jupiter and see a lot of stars with them and start a lifetime of stargazing. We'll never know. But I think that we're increasing the population out there that is aware of astronomy and would be supportive of other activities. Anyway, they're a lot of fun. Well, some other fun that I had is with all-sky cameras, and I brought the mirror that you see in the photograph there, and I have built a nice rig here and a nice base and everything. This is actually a driven base, so I can put this camera here and track the sky and take close-up time exposures that way as well. So it's a multi-purpose outfit, but it's quite bulky, so you can't go everywhere with it. And this is the view at Stellafane during the day with the camera. This is Steve O'Mara here. And the Stellafane clubhouse and the Porter turret telescope in the background there. And this is a twilight picture. I took several of them, and I usually sat on the rock after I set the timer on the camera and ran away to the rock. And sometimes I goofed. Didn't run away. Every now and then, I get excited or something, or produce some interesting unintended results. Like this ghost here. When I took too long locking the cable release, I was there fiddling with the cable release, and I made myself into the ghost of Stellafane. This is closer to what I was trying to get. And I took slides, rather I took negatives, and then duplicated the negative. As you can see, this is a negative. Duplicated it onto more negative material to make the slide, positive slide. And you have to redo these with different filtration until they come out just right. And I think I must have a better one than this. But anyway, you can see the clubhouse, the Milky Way, the summer triangle, and the Porter turret telescope up there. And behind it, unfortunately, light pollution from Springfield. Well, here's the all-sky camera down in Baja California at our eclipse site in Santiago. Now, of course, that whole big yellow frame would never have traveled on the airplane. So I rethought the whole thing. And I also wanted to solve a problem that I found with the all-sky camera, that you're looking at a viewfinder down at the mirror and trying to focus. And you want the stars overhead to be in focus, but when you're doing this, you probably are setting it up in the daytime, you don't have stars there, and if you were doing it at nighttime, the stars are hard to see. It's very hard to focus the all-sky camera properly. Well, the image made by a curved mirror like that is actually behind the mirror. And if this were a spherical curve, which I don't think it is, and if you knew the radius of the curvature, you'd know exactly where the image was back here. But it would be a curved image plane. Well, I did some measurements, and I found out that if you made a frame like this, and this collapses so you can put it in a suitcase and take it on the airplane. And for this particular mirror, if you made that frame 57 millimeters high, give or take a centimeter or so, I suppose, and instead of putting the mirror on a flat background or on the ground, you put the mirror raised up on that thing, that triangle. Well, now what you gain is when you're looking down through your viewfinder, you can focus on the background, focus on the ground, focus on the sand. And the sky, as seen in the mirror, will be in focus because the image of the sky is now formed at ground level. The other thing I found was that whereas the photos that you saw a moment ago from Stellafane were taken with a standard 50 millimeter lens on a 35 millimeter camera, if the camera looking down here is a larger format camera with a longer focus lens, this is a 75 millimeter lens, you will get a better image. The mirror picks up more detail from the sky than the 50 millimeter lens can record over the film. So a larger format camera, focused down on the mirror will give a better image. And you will have a better limiting magnitude and everything. So instead of bringing the yellow triangle down to Baja, I brought this collapsible triangle, sat it on the ground, put the mirror here, and put the large format camera on a standard tripod down the mirror like this. And I got some interesting pictures that way. Here's what the sky over our eclipse site looked like about an hour before totality, second contact. Where I'm standing, the mountains to the west of us are in the background. So the moon shadow will be coming in from this direction, from the west. We've got a beautiful sky there. These people at the neighboring site are friends of ours from Copper Cliff, next to Sudbury. But this was taken 45 minutes before the eclipse. And as you've all heard, I'm sure, many times, and I know you've already had a couple of meetings to show your eclipse slides. We had cloud, pretty obvious here. If I had the whole all-sky frame, you would see that the cloud actually looked like a spiral galaxy centered over us with its nucleus straight overhead. So it was clearly centered over our site. And this is 45 minutes before second contact. And this was maybe 3 minutes before second contact. Look at the guy on the left-hand side there, looking up at the sun, which is almost straight overhead. Notice it's very dark in the west here. The moon shadow is approaching. And the light is changing so fast. I'm getting very caught up in this. I'm very excited. The roosters and hens are cackling over the fence in the family farm next door. And it's very dark in the west. It feels like some giant storm is approaching. Now I'm jumping up and trying to adjust the shutter as fast as I can so my wife, who was actually taking the pictures, could take another picture. Well, I caught myself again. But to me, this picture reminds me how excited I was at that particular time. It really was a wonderful event. It was just marvelous. And the cloud didn't dampen our experience as far as I'm concerned. And this is second contact, or at least it's as close to second contact as I got. You see that the horizon colors are very dark in the western half, very bright in the eastern half, and the picture divides along this line. In some reproductions of this frame, the division is more obvious. You've got the moon shadow dividing the sky into bright and dark halves. This is a couple of minutes into totality. And the sky looks awful overhead. But we've got beautiful horizon colors. This is the same exposure, but I reproduced it differently so you can see the horizon better. Well, here's another eclipse. This was 1979. I was teaching high school that day, although we had exams, and I could spend a lot of time out in front of the school, getting students coming in and out on their breaks to look at the eclipse. And I wasn't able to get away to Gimli, or wherever. I think probably many people here saw that eclipse. How many people saw the 79? Look at that, eh? About a dozen people. But I had a good time with it in North Bay, but of course, this is about as far as the eclipse got. And we're seeing a partial eclipse by projection here. It's one of the great safe ways. Well, this is the equipment that I took to Baja. I designed it specifically to be set up from a compact bundle of parts with wing nuts, and everything would be adjusted to the right angle straight away. That is, instead of having a whole bunch of adjustments that you had to make, everything was already built into the carpentry as I built it in Sudbury, and that's what it looked like when it was all set up. And I was tracking by looking into a guiding eyepiece here and turning this knob to keep the sun centered, taking pictures with an 800mm lens that I made just finished making a few days before the eclipse here, and with a wide-angle lens on Nikon camera there. And this is towards the end of the eclipse. I'm amazed how many pictures I think everybody who took pictures is amazed how many pictures did turn out in spite of the cloud. And I have pictures I took before this showing quite a bit of corona. I have one Cibachrome print up here that we can look at in a few minutes. But this is towards the end of the eclipse, because that's the part where I thought our sight actually gave us an advantage. Because this giant prominence that did not disappear when the diamond came actually appears right on top of the diamond. And here we have a complete perimeter of the sun outlined with the ring of corona. We have the diamond, and we have the ruby on top of the diamond. I don't think that's ever been described in print at this eclipse or any other eclipse that I've been able to read about. I don't think it happened for any other site. I think our cloudy site turned out to be a very lucky site for viewing the end of the eclipse, because to me this is an absolutely spectacular event that's totally unique, and I believe RASC Expedition Santiago was the lucky one at the end of the eclipse. I was just totally thrilled and flabbergasted when I realized that I had that image. I should explain that these slides are made from negatives that I took on negative film down there and duped them onto slide film. And I feel that the Cibachrome prints I made from these slides are even better than what you're seeing on the screen. I wanted to bring some 11 by 14s, but I couldn't at the last moment. I have a couple of 8 by 10s here you might want to look at later. Look how the chromosphere hung on, even as the diamond grew into a great slice of photosphere. And there's even a little bit of prominence still left here. I was just flabbergasted. Another thing I couldn't believe is that I witnessed this with my eyes. I was seeing it and being completely ecstatic about it, and somehow I managed to get about 8 pictures during those few seconds. Well, you know this man. You've probably seen the Astronomer series on PBS, and I know that Doug knows where this picture was taken, because we just talked about this earlier this evening. Right, Doug? Right. Well, this was at the General Assembly in 1988 in Victoria, BC. And John Dodson drove that man all the way up from San Francisco, stopping along the way at Crater Lake and other places, but arriving at Victoria for our conference. And he set up his sunscope, and hundreds of, well, would you believe, dozens and dozens of professional astronomers got a good look at the sun through John's sunscope here. Well, we built one. We built a whole bunch of them at Science North. We loan them out to schools. We get kids to look at them. They are very user-friendly, teacher-friendly telescopes. And this guy is getting a real good look, and his group was drawing the sun that day and getting very nice drawings of sunspots. Then they went back to their school and did projects on the sun. So they really got involved. And I think those kids are really going to remember that a positive experience about telescopes and their interest in the sun that started that time. And I think it's really any time that you have the opportunity to get newcomers and young people in particular to look through your telescopes and discover things like this, discover the universe and see that they can see it for their own eyes and not just read about it in books. Anybody who can do that is going to experience a great gift from seeing the discovery, the excitement of discovery that these people will experience. And what do we get from that in the long run? I think we get a public which is more supportive of astronomical research, more ready to take up arms if a radio observatory gets closed, more ready to cooperate with us when we want to control lighting at night. So these are some of the rewards of some of the activities that I told you that I have tried to portray to you tonight. Now, I think I've probably gone on much too long, and You've probably forgotten any questions if you had any. But I am available if anybody would like any more information about any of these activities that I described. But I think I'll turn it over to Rolf.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. We've enjoyed having you with us today, and it's nice to have you come to Ottawa. We hope to see you a lot more often.
I hope so.
But it was a very enjoyable talk for all of us. Thank you very much.
Well, I really enjoyed it. I hope, as you say, to be back sooner to see more of your activities.
Okay, great.
At what stage is it? Well, it could be polished now, but it would never have the right figure in the middle. So we have to go back to mid stages of grinding to get the proper spherical curve. And my goal is to have it ready for figuring next summer. Then I have to build the tube. Yes?
That 57 millimeters, is that the actual image, that's the image distance? Did you determine that by trial and error?
You mean
How did you
from
determine
here
Yeah.
to the table? Right. Of course, if I knew this was spherical, and I didn't really measure it, but I'm not at all sure that it is, then it would have a center of curvature, and the focal point, the image plane, would be halfway in from the center of curvature,
Right.
but it would be curved. So what I did was I decided to do it by experiment. I took a camera with a close-up lens, and I focused the camera on the image at different points across the mirror, always selecting an object far away on the horizon. And by the distance from the camera to the I could tell where the image was because I knew where the camera was focusing. See, so then I was able to put all those measurements together and draw the image plane on a diagram. Then I sort of took the average value, weighted towards the middle, because you want the stars straight overhead to be in focus. And that gave me this distance. And actually the best answer I have, I suppose, is that it focuses. You notice
But
that
you did it by trial and error.
it was a measurement using a camera lens, but it was empirical rather than a theoretical determination. And you saw that the sand grains on the ground at our eclipse site, it was very sandy. All those sand grains were in focus, and the sky was in focus too. So the bottom line is, if you can get the support surface and the sky in focus at the same time, then you've done it right. And then from there on in, when you set the camera up, instead of hoping for an airplane to fly overhead that you can focus on, you just focus instead on the ground on either side. It helped me a lot.
A couple of announcements. As I mentioned earlier, the observers group meeting will be on the first Friday of November, November 1st. But more important than that, from a number of viewpoints, is the dinner meeting, and that will be on November 15th. And tickets for that will probably only be available at the next observers group meeting. I don't see Gary Mussar here tonight. He will probably have the tickets, and that will probably be your best chance to buy the tickets. Tickets will only be sold before the dinner meeting. They will not be available at the door. So you must see Gary about tickets for the dinner meeting before the event. You can probably get them by mail. The speaker will be